Welcome to Empowering Homeschool Conversations, your authority in navigating the world of homeschooling diverse learners. Featuring Peggy Ployhar from SPED Homeschool, Annie Yorty from AnnieYorty.com, Leilani Melendez from Living with Eve, Stephanie Buckwalter from eLARP Learning, and Dawn Jackson from Dawn Jackson Educational Consulting and Tutoring. With over 75 years of combined homeschooling expertise, experiences, and perspectives, this group is eager to share their wealth of wisdom to empower your homeschooling journey. So grab your favorite mug, settle in, and get ready for insightful discussions, valuable insights, and practical tips. Give your homeschool the power boost it needs to successfully educate the unique learners in your home.
Welcome to Empowering Homeschool Conversations, where we talk about ways to empower families like yours to successfully homeschool children with learning challenges. I'm your host, Peggy Ployhar. Today, we're diving into a powerful topic that intersects faith, science, and creative homeschooling. How we can turn abstract concepts, especially in subjects like math and physics, into tangible truths that our children can understand, connect with, and even marvel at. Today's guest is Margaret Shawver, a Christian mom, certified physics teacher, and the creator of a simple but brilliant teaching tool, differentiated graph paper. Margaret created this during her master's program to help students better understand the relationship between variables on a graph by color coding the axes as blue for X and Y for red, and found that this small tweak made a big difference in student comprehension. Today, we're going to explore how that simple idea is part of a much bigger conversation about how kids think, how we teach, and how we reflect on God's design in the way we approach learning. Welcome to the show, Margaret.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I am super nerdy about this. When you first emailed me, you go, I know you have a physics degree and you're going to love this. And I do. Not too many times do I get super nerdy on this show. So I'm super excited about that, and also to bring,
Speaking of nerdy, my connection is going out a little bit, so we will pray a little harder.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
okay, awesome.
Yes. And this is recording on your side locally, so the stops will be less when we play this recording.
Okay,
so this
great.
Recording is recorded ahead of time. So all of you that are listening, and most of our listeners are on podcasts, so we appreciate you joining us. So I would love for you to start with just telling us a little bit about your background, both as a mom and a physics teacher, and homeschool mom. What led you to homeschooling and thinking differently about how kids learn?
Wow. Like so much of the things that I kind of my identity, like being a Christian and then being an engineer, being a scientist, it's been such a journey since I was very small that it's hard to say where the origin point really was, right?
Yes.
I mean, I was born into a Christian family, for example, and I accepted Jesus into my heart when I was 7 officially at summer camp. Yes, I remember it well, in the lodge. And I, unrelated sort of in the secular realm, but very much in my heart are my love for God's world, my love for God, my love for God's world. And I've been taking things apart since before I was 7 and putting them back together, mainly successfully. And I was, a few moments from that time, fast forward a few moments in my educational and growth journey stand out to me to bring me where I am today. One was algebra. I don't know about you. Yes. I took it in 8th grade, and my teacher, who was a new teacher, and may God bless all new teachers. Let's just have a moment of appreciation for new teachers. My gosh. She was quite good, but she made a mistake in the transparencies. Do you remember when they used to show?
Yes,
yes, exactly.
Back in the day, yes.
Yes, and she had hers on a roll, And so, you would roll to get the new sheet. Yes.
Right.
Remember when they had to sell all that stuff at Teaching Toys or anyway?
Oh, yeah.
I know. So she made a mistake. She wrote a number where she meant to put X or something. And I said, oh, hey, you made a mistake there. You meant to put X and you wrote the number. And she said, oh, yes, thank you, Maggie, and rolled back and erased it and put the X in. And the kid behind me, John, I still remember his name. He was a drummer. I was a flute player, not important. He said, she's finding errors in what the teacher is writing on the board, and I am completely lost. And it was at that moment that it stuck out in my brain, not just for the kudos, which I appreciated, but I realized that I saw the world in a different way. This learning algebra was like learning a language that I didn't know yet, but already spoke.
Right. Yeah.
And it has not been that way, I know, for a lot of the human population, including the students that I teach and including, like, I know your audience's kids. My kids are still very little. And so far they show regular mathematical aptitude. That is to say, good mathematical aptitude. We'll see what the future holds.
Right.
And then there was a time in high school where I was taking physics, and for the first time it was algebra based, and I was a year ahead, right? So my classmates were they were all seniors, I was a junior, and they realized that I knew what I was, and many of them were my church friends. You see, this one girl in particular, Malia, she was a church friend of mine from youth group, and she started asking me if I would tutor her at Starbucks in the mornings, that she would buy my coffee and then she would drive me to school, Peggy, and it was cool to get a ride from a senior to show up at my big, like, very urban high school, So that in and of itself was a draw. Those two instances, and of course many others, but I realized that I saw the world differently. Like I said before, I've never said it that way, but it feels so right. It was a language that I didn't speak yet, but I knew it already.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so much of math is leading up to that, but it doesn't, it makes that huge leap when you switch into those algebraic functions. And for some kids that they don't grasp the stuff ahead of that. And so that's why it makes that leap so hard. But for those that have seen those connections all the way through, it like is this epiphany. It's like, oh, that's what we're, and the same thing happens when you jump to calculus too. It is another leap that you have to take to get into, all of those equations. I remember when I was teaching my son, he's very mathematically minded, and he's actually a biomedical engineer now. And he's like, this is so cool. And then he's explaining, how he can do all these 3-dimensional graphs of, on computers that I never had the access to. And, he's doing calculus. I'm like, this is fascinating. And so glad that he's taken it beyond, where I even did. And I did theoretical physics. That was my concentration. I loved, the math problems that took
goodness gracious.
all night to solve. But yeah. Oh, well, for another day.
Wow, boy. Yeah, we could get down a whole rabbit hole about that. Yeah. My gosh, the number of Greek symbols you must be intimately familiar with.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
It's been a long time, but
yes, it does get a little rusty. Mm-hmm.
Yes, it was great to teach my son because all of that came back, and it was like, oh, yes, I forgot about that. And
yes,
integrals.
Yes,
so many wonderful things.
Yes,
so,
yes.
Yeah. But for people who are not like us, parents who kind of feel intimidated, and kids feel intimidated by the subject of math and science, why do you think that it's important to reframe those subjects into other areas that, so considering, we're looking at how we see the world, what is that connection, and how does that help for people that don't have those math brains or don't feel like they have those math brains that we were just talking about?
Right. So I'm going to touch on the last part first, because in, of course, the educational community and in anyone who homeschools and like you and I said earlier, everyone homeschools. Every
Absolutely.
parent homeschools. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, we are all out here homeschooling, as we should be, right? We are automatically teaching our children about how we see the world as God commanded us to do. Raise up a child till he is 7. Like there's all sorts of specific instructions, not to mention examples about parenthood in the Bible. But so something that parents may see is this idea of math brains, right? Like math people. And as educators, we all fight against this, but I have found that is not very helpful for my students, because then, for example, my friend Malia, right, the senior who gave me rides because I tutored her, she was not dumb. She could tell that I was getting it and she wasn't. So what does that mean? Right? We need to have some foundation for that, some context for that realization for our students, our kids, because our kids are going to come home if they don't homeschool, or if they have brothers and sisters or friends in their co-ops who might get it faster, or they might be the one who gets it faster and they don't know how to handle that fairly awkward situation. Exactly. I think it's so key to tell people that God has made us differently and as members of the body of Christ. And that is important. If everyone was like me, and possibly you, we'd all be sending rockets to nowhere. Like that would be the pinnacle of my achievement, right? Building apps that no one used, making robots that would carry my coffee around my house. And so I try to tell my students there's our analytical thinking skills, and some people have those in larger measure.
Right.
And that's not a problem. That's not a problem. No. You have many skills that they do not, possibly empathy, normalcy, who knows? But it's okay if you get it faster. It's good to try to exercise your skills, steward the skills that God has given you. Right. Help out your Christian friend next to you, or your any friend, really, and remain humble that this is a gift that God has given you. It's not anything that you earned on your own merit, right? Your grades, your achievement in your field, good job working hard. But I just think that's an important distinction. So
true.
Then going back, what can we do? So, Jesus used parables 24/7, basically, right? All the time. And he speaks directly very few times in the Bible. And even when he does, he uses parables at those times, even short ones. We are storytellers as humans. We connect with other people based on experiences, shared experiences, like physical memories that we have that we can connect new material to, right?
Right.
Jesus did not walk around like with a scribe and like a bunch of Pharisees and like a connotation, like a Concordia somewhere. Like he didn't do any of that. So I find it really helpful to use story cues with my kids that maybe they do easily understand what's happening, or maybe they don't. I try to remind people, the hexagon is stable. The hexagon is the most stable geometric shape, for example. Bees build their hives in it, right? It's one of the foundational shapes in chemistry, which affects your phone battery, right? And you just keep going as modern day and as tangible as possible until a kid says, oh, I get it.
Yeah.
And so that may be, now I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm sorry. But I find explanations like layer cakes for a surface area or a flower shape. I'm looking at rhododendrons right outside my window, and you can see that the edge is like a flute. It has a fluted shape, and then they grow upward in this beautiful parabola shape, right?
Yeah.
Geometry and shapes are not something that was invented to put in your math book to give you something to do from 9 to 12. This is a thing that God has made. And if we're very lucky, we can learn the language that that we think that he used, right, behind all these things.
Right. That's beautiful, because kids see those things. They're tangible. They're in part of their everyday life. It's not like you said, it's the applicable, the things that they can touch and see and relate to, that aren't just some abstract thought. I think we make math way too abstract, and then we disassociate it with all the other places of life. And yet
much like people do to God, actually. God is something that we do on Sunday mornings from 9 to noon, and then we're done.
Yes. Yeah. So true. But it takes a special person to be able to connect the two, which I acknowledge, because I was raised by an engineer, and my dad could never associate what he was trying to teach me in math to the everyday world. I was the in-between for my siblings who didn't understand math. So I had to become this like interpreter for them. I think that was a true gift, because when I worked as an engineer, I realized I was all of a sudden very highly sought after, because I was the only one that really understood what the engineers were saying and really wanted done, and nobody else did. But it is very hard when you, like you were talking about the scales of, being an engineer and having that engineer mind, and then being able to be able to relate to the everyday world, and how we need people of all different abilities to be able to make something and use something in that mathematical realm, the physics realm, to make it useful and to make it something that we all want to dig into. So it does. It takes understanding from both sides. So,
which is so difficult.
Yeah, it is very difficult. But the more that we realize that it's necessary on both ends, I think the more that we are willing to dive into that, because I just hate it when people say, I'm just not a math person. There's things about math that everybody loves, but maybe you just haven't got there yet.
Everybody loves it when they get unexpected savings at the Walgreens.
Yes, absolutely.
That's math right there. I tell my students, if the most math that you're doing in math class is calculating the grade that you need on the final to get a B or whatever you need, that's the only math that you're doing, something has gone horribly wrong. But on the flip side, you care a lot about math, because here you are calculating out your grades based, like predicted on some lottery winning in the future. No offense to the student study skills.
That is so true. Yes, I sat down with my budget book for my business the other day, and that's the part of math I don't like. And if that was the part I was introduced to, like that in statistics, I probably would have said I'm not a math person, because that's, I could do high level mathematical computations, but doing stuff in a straight line with percentages and averages, that my brain just goes crazy.
But did you, I'm sorry, Peggy, go ahead.
No, you're good.
So I have a question for you. When in high school math, right, high school physics in particular, it's algebra based. They don't do anything on curves, even friction, coefficients, and all that stuff is introduced later in the course, right? After, maybe it just takes a special mind to wade through SI units. The entire first unit of physics is just so dry, but I loved it. I loved conversion factors. I loved them in chemistry. Not the point here. Did you understand physics right away, or were you just good at the equation part and then your understanding sort of built later?
I was good at the equation part.
Same.
And I definitely, when I started being a teaching assistant in labs, that's when, everything started to come into play in college, when I was more hands-on and applicable. I was just a very nerdy math, theoretical math student.
Yeah. Wow. I'm an engineer. I'm a chemical engineer by training. And I found, even Diffie Q, I had to take twice because
that was a tough one.
Thank you.
Yes.
I feel validated. Yes.
Although I failed geometry. That was the only math class I failed.
What, at the
in college?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I'm sure it's a lot tougher than ninth grade geometry.
Yeah.
Yes.
Ninth
I had
grade
a student actually ask me the other day, why they were teaching probability in geometry, because that's the unit that they were in. And I sub right now. I'm subbing to the school, so I have a lot of very varied experiences, which is fantastic. But a student asked me why they were teaching probability in geometry, and I said, well, because in higher level geometry and in math, the probability that a point is in a certain sphere or in a certain area will be very closely linked.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway,
that's so true. So you developed this graph paper in your master's program. And so what is it, and what problem were you trying to solve when you designed it?
In my teaching, as you asked earlier, and I went on at great length about my journey understanding not just the body of Christ, which might take me all my life, but the idea in particular that so many of my friends, people I liked and respected and I knew were smart, did not see the world the way I did. And from that basic acceptance that I began to teach and tutor in a different way, to just honestly grasp at straws, but not in a frantic way, trying to find the cue, the parable, the connection that would help them understand that math and everything that uses math, chemistry, physics, biomechanical, everything, sees the world as a predictable system with slots where you can put in variables that and then with enough pencil work, you get out the variable that you don't know, and that helps you build something. Right. And then that leads you on to greater discoveries in which now you know more and you can solve for more unknowns. The original algebra problem is, Babylon, right? We'll just pick an ancient empire. How many acres of food do I need to grow to feed my family, assuming a 50% yield, assuming that the king will take 50%, 25%, but honestly, 50% yield and then 50% of that, and then maybe the locusts are coming, right? That's the original algebra problem, is how many plants do I need to plant to have some left over? That's the original unknown, the X.
Right.
So it's not that humanity hasn't done this, right? There's sports stars all over the place. I use LeBron James constantly as a great geometry example. He is the master of the layup. And every time he throws his basketball at the little square, it goes into the basket like magic because he's a geometry genius. He probably doesn't see himself that way.
Right.
But this is something that we can do. We carry out complex electrochemistry equations all the time up here. So God has designed us this way. We are made in his image. Hopefully, with enough brain exercise, we can get a little peek. So all that to say, I've just listed several of the hooks that I try to use for people. And this is one of those hooks. So I don't know if you can see, I went through quite some trial and error to get the right brightness of color. So the x-axes are blue and the y-axes are red.
Okay, yeah.
So simple, but it helps students keep track of which is X and which is Y, because there is a visual cue to keep them apart. I mean, I don't know about you, but I reverse my coordinates a lot when I'm tired, fatigued, going on the board. Yes.
Yes,
And
especially when you're like trying to create images for social media and going, which one is the up and down and which one's back and forth? I can't remember. Is it the first or the second?
6 image on page, like literally the bane
Yeah.
of every person's existence. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. So what reactions have you seen from students when you've introduced this tool?
Why has no one done this before?
Hmm.
That is their original, if I had a penny for every time I've heard that, right? But
Yeah.
that's what everyone says. Why is this not standard already? Especially for differentiated math, beginning math, literally anyone up until, sophomore or junior year of high school, when you're trying to fit in all your pre-calc graphs on the same page.
Right.
But, I went through some trial and error to make sure that it's not too bright. So you can still see pencil marks, normal pencil marks. You don't need a Sharpie to be seen on this colored graph paper.
Right.
But you can see the difference.
Yeah. So why do you think it makes such a big difference mentally for students? What's going on that makes that connection?
They don't understand that X and Y are two variables in which you change X and then something happens with Y. Instead, they view every graph as a picture with some alt text, and they have to memorize literally all of the pictures and all of the alt texts that will ever happen, right? I get students that say, I used to know it, but then you changed the letters. And that is so common.
They're so heavily relying on memorization when that wasn't the key to teaching math anyways. But I think a lot of people do feel that way, is that math is something that requires high rote memory. To a certain point, we have just the times tables that are helpful to memorize. But beyond that, it's much more just being able to move things around and know the order and how to do that versus memorizing every step.
Right. You shouldn't need to memorize every step of the same problem. And then if you're lucky, other problems will look enough like the first problem that you memorized that you can swap out the 8 for the 3 and swap out the 4 for the 6, and you can get the right answer because you follow the same steps. But then the appearance of a wild coefficient in front of the x squared term just throws students for a loop. I don't know how to do this if there's a 1 in front of the x squared. Okay, so now we can talk about laws, right? We can talk about variables. These are slots. And I find that the visual cue helps students remember that this is a slot. The X slot can take any number in the domain in any X value that won't, like illegally fill the equation, right? And then the Y value is the red value that happens because you've done something to the blue value.
Right.
Even slope, right? That's red over blue. Change in red over change in blue. So
right. You basically moved it into a cause-effect relationship, which I think is much easier to understand than a mathematical equation, or at least with all the variables that kids are looking at and trying to wrap their brains around. It's like, yes, I know. If I do this on my computer, that's going to happen. You press a key and, that's whatever function key it is, this is what goes. And I mean, we have so much of that. I mean, you just, you eat, you feel full. It's part of life. But I think
we understand cause and effect very well as humans. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. So what are a few real life examples of how you use this paper to teach key concepts?
Oh, wow. It's now I just start with it automatically. And I notice right away that my students don't mix up the X and the Y. And that saves them so much fatigue over the long term, that they understand slope better. They understand the y-intercept better. Speaking of slope and the y-intercept, I've had students be so surprised that those letters and concepts show up in other equations. Like, oh,
Right.
this is just slope. Like, yes, that is what this is. And
Mhm.
so often, I try to do everything. M for slope is like M for mountain, right? It's M for mountain is a slope. I don't, maybe do you know why the y-intercept is called B? I never understood that one.
No, I don't know. Somebody just thought that that wasn't one that we use a whole lot, maybe
I
in other
know.
equations.
I know. I mean, it is, anyway. So I find that if a student in particular is fatiguing or is tired or having trouble keeping track of variables, this graph paper is so helpful. And I find also for differentiated students, I've worked with people who have dysgraphia or dyscalculia, and
Mhm.
the visual cue allows their brains to not have to solve that problem every time.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they have to
Makes a lot of
remember it
sense.
every time. Wait, which way is which? But with a visual cue, you don't have to. I mean, our stop signs are red, right? Our street lights are color coded. It is something that we vibe to as humans.
Right. Yes, absolutely. So if parents, whether they homeschool or they're helping their kids at home with homework,
We're all
want to use,
homeschooling.
yes, exactly. If they want to use this tool, um, what's a good way for them to start incorporating that into the work that they're doing with their students?
Every time you graph, if your student is having trouble with math, I feel like anytime you're going to graph something, you should use differentiated graph paper. And if the parent is comfortable, if you're solving equations, linear one variable equations, you could even graph them on my differentiated graph paper, right? You could just say, look, here's what that means.
Right.
8x
Yes.
equals 16. What does x equal, right? And you can
Mhm.
say, look, there's we can divide on both sides, but more accurately, you can say 8x equals y. So we're gonna graph that out. When x is 1, y is 8. When x is
Mhm.
2, y is 16. When x is -1, y is -8. And here's what that equation means. It means that for every time we change x, y is multiplied 8 times. X is
Right.
multiplied 8 times, and that's what y equals. The other day, I was helping a student with piecewise functions, an Algebra 2 student with piecewise functions. And those are tricky. I don't love those myself, but I loved them so much more after working as an industry engineer because, as I told my student, the grosser math is on the page, the more it looks like real life. I am
Right.
telling you, yes,
Mhm.
there's
Yeah.
coefficients on literally 5 variables on this equation to properly model the mechanical stress on this rivet in this plane assembly, right? Like
Mhm.
assuming this paint and this chromium coating, but we had to phase out hexavalent chromium, so now we have to use a substitute, and that will fatigue at this particular rate. And piecewise functions are a fairly simplistic example of that math in the real world. From this set to this set of x inputs, it's linear. And then from this set to this set of x inputs, it's a parabola. And then over here, after x equals 5, it's a straight line. And
Mm.
I think just saying that out loud makes me think, oh, x is blue, and then the y's are red, right? Like, and I did not grow up that way, but I keep thinking of it now. Like, that would be so helpful to have a color code for when x changes, y does this. And then when x changes, y does this. And so, yeah, I told her that this is what real life looks like because these equations are only modeled accurately. They only model real life accurately under certain pretty specific input conditions. Blue.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And there are so many things just even in the real world that have all these variables, that we can start pointing our kids to that we don't think about as being mathematical. So like, just doing something out in the weather, or, growing a garden. How many variables are involved there with the soil and the weather and the seed, and, there's so many different applications that we can start delving into, even with just this overall concept of taking those things outside of the box of equations and math, but yet they are things we could equate for with certain variables. And so, that can open up a lot of space for kids who don't naturally think that math is for them. What are some other things that, parents can look towards to open their kids' eyes to seeing that math is around them everywhere?
I mean, we are all, as I'm sure you tell your kids all the time, but I certainly do, we are all glued to the earth because of the gravitational attraction between masses, right? That is the number one, the reason that we need a lot of thrust to leave the Earth's atmosphere. Escape velocity. Can't leave Earth without it. Anyway, so it is, those are all predictable things. And I find that my career at Boeing, which is where I got my engineering chops, really, drives that home for me. It because you need a ton. I can tell my students that the Wright brothers flew for the first time really on a wing and a prayer, literally. But today, if Delta wants to run a profitable business, they need to be able to predict how much fuel they're going to use on takeoff, landing, and gliding, right? And that we need math for. Mm-hmm. So it's not just a matter of launching our glider with a bicycle off of a cliff anymore.
Right.
We need predictability. Electric cars. I tell my students, and to answer your question, I think parents also have been brought up in this idea that the math they learn in textbooks, quite sterilized, just page after page of parabolas with different coefficients, is different from the math that they do all day, every day. Their gas mileage, as you said, their grocery budgets, right? Mm-hmm. Their homeschooling calculations in the first place. Someone stays home. That's right. Someone stays home because they decided that they don't wish to go in the Christian school route, but money has played a part in that. Do I wish that we lived in the aspect of heaven in which we don't have to pay out money for material blessings?
So looking forward to that.
Absolutely. But God has a plan, and God has a plan.
I'm afraid that gravity doesn't play into that as well.
Oh my gosh. No, me too. I just want to eat chocolate all day, Peggy. Yes. Oh my gosh, that's a great example. Diet and nutrition. If there's diet and nutrition fans at home, someone's calculating macros. I know they are. Right. Someone is calculating how big the TV is going to be to fit in the space after someone knocked over the previous TV. Someone is going to calculate, their health insurance bills, and there's plane tickets, right? If someone maximizes credit card points, someone's doing a lot of math at home.
Right. Yeah. Even an application my husband introduced to me just this week was, do you know that Google can tell you how tall a building is based on, just Google Maps and the driving around. And then he goes, and then you can equate how high the interior space is of that building, because I'm looking for a new space for my other business. And so I'm like, I need this certain height of a ceiling. He goes, no, that won't work because the calculations with Google show that space is not as high as you want it. And but I mean, then you save yourself so much time to even going to look at that space. I mean, we're like using these skills all of the time. And like you said, we rarely call that math. But it's these constant questions that we need answered, and we use data that we have around to figure out what we need to know.
The great unknown. Right.
Yes.
You solve, you find out all of the variables that you can until you're left with at least one or two variables, and you can guess at one, and then you can solve for the other one. If that's not right, go back.
Right. Absolutely. So, it's a good point to take into consideration. Kids will struggle with typical math curriculum. What can parents do that don't have a choice as to their child either using that curriculum, or they do have a choice as a homeschool parent to remove it, but they don't want to have their child keep feeling like they're a failure at math? What are some first steps for them?
Wow. So if you and I solve this on this call, we can market that, and then we can become millionaires.
Exactly.
I mean, that is the $10,000 question, right? Is it
right?
Can curriculum be more than just a tool? Can curriculum be a pathway to understanding? Right now, curriculum designers will tell you, of course it can be. Anyone who has ever tried to teach a kid math out of a math book will tell you that if so, they sure haven't found it yet.
Yeah.
So I come from a skill and drill background, and I found that very useful in my time. One of my formative memories is of me learning long division in third grade, and me telling my father that I didn't want to complete this worksheet because I knew how to do it already. And he took it from me, finished the whole thing in like 10 seconds, and gave it back to me. And he said, unless you know how to do it that well, you don't know how to do it. And I thought, okay. So there's nothing wrong with a curriculum that emphasizes skill and drill, I think, because I think the pencil work is very helpful. But I think emphasizing to your child that everyone has a part of math where they struggle. I had to take DiffyQ twice. You failed college geometry. My record is not spotless in any way, and I am good at math. Good at math in the general sense of the term. Right. So emphasizing to a child that not only does everyone have this, but it's to be expected. And if you are going to keep learning complicated concepts, this is to be expected. Okay, this moment has come for you right now. That's good. I'm sitting next to you. You have adults who care about your math education. We will work this out because, child, this is going to happen again too.
Right.
This is not just in math. There's going to be some SAT writing passage that you can't make head or tails of, right? And this is going to happen to you again. This is not a mark of failure on your part. This is a mark that you are learning and trying new things. So emphasizing that, but I think going outside any curriculum should be, well welcomed. And I know that, your co-op might not have an option for that, or the teacher that you're working with might not be open to that idea, but it's your child and their education, right? There's nothing wrong with getting tutors if you don't feel comfortable. And I wish that's not the point of this conversation, right? We want to empower parents to do it themselves. But talking to other people, talk to your older generations that you might have around. How did they learn math? What made sense for them? What's a way that they remember using math every day in their lives, right? I mean, my grandmother, she's gone now, but she remembers rationing books. Can you imagine?
Wow. Yes.
Huh. That would have been math right there. How many potatoes can we eat this week before we have to go scrounge them from our garden or go hungry?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. real life, and those things that kids remember, that they don't remember always, the lessons from the book. And so even if you are, like you said, kind of stuck in how your child's being taught, it doesn't mean that you can't supplement in beautiful ways that help them connect with the information that they're learning. And if you can't do that personally, ask around. Say, well, how is this a real life application? So when my child Johnny wants to know, so put that out there. Maybe your people that you're friends with on Facebook, put it up as a challenge. We want to make this real world.
That's a great idea. Yes. And Peggy, I just remembered, first of all, I don't know what your favorite book in the Bible is. Mine is Nehemiah, because it's a project management handbook. Like, I just love. Thank you. I love that book. And it has my favorite verse in it, 4:9, Nehemiah 4:9. We prayed to the Lord and we posted a guard. And if that doesn't say everything about Christian career management, I don't know what does. Or Christian, production excellence, right? We want to do our chosen path well and put God at the center of it. So you pray to the Lord, you post a guard. Like, there's nothing else to be said. But am I going to name the wrong book of the Pentateuch? But in, Deuteronomy, Leviticus, Numbers, even in Exodus, they go through lots of numbers, right? Even in Genesis, they talk about the measurements of the ark, of Noah's ark. And then they talk about the measurements of the Ark of the Covenant. Very much so. Yes. So dramatically, they talk about the measurements of the blue and purple curtains. They talk about the measurements of the fountains to wash your hands. They talk about the measurements of the fat pans. I mean, it's just page after page of numbers. So it's not even that God didn't find that important to write down and pass on.
So true. Yeah.
You could build one. You could build one for a homeschool project. You could build a replica, which would be, obviously, I would hope, a scale
and then
model.
You can ratio it, scale it down. Yes, we actually did that with our kids.
You did? I love
that. Yeah. So many good homeschool memories built into that. But yeah, there is so much math involved in the Bible, and also in creation. And in everyday things that we see in nature, especially. And you talked about beehives, and so what are some like examples of everyday objects that parents can use to really help their child understand that math is all around them?
Oh gosh. Peggy, having this conversation with you in particular, I hope for a day in which we don't have to have this conversation, because math is so integrated into our lives, right? That curriculum is a pathway to understanding. But until that day occurs, we can talk about things like training wheels. So bicycles, great example. The bigger the wheel, the taller the bike, the more power it takes to push around a big wheel, but the more force you'll get as you coast downhill, right? Why do BMX riders have little bikes? Why do training wheels help? Because they distribute the force left and right so that you're not trying to be a gyroscope. Then you could talk about gyroscopes if you wanted to. Why are motorcycles more stable when they go faster as opposed to when they're in parade rest? I always watch the motorcycle cops drive by 2x2, and I'm like thinking, wow, they're going 10 miles an hour. I mean, I could not do it on those gigantic Harleys, but that's a story for another day. Flowers. My favorite example right now, flowers. We're in spring. Flowers are everywhere. Yes. They grow, tulips and roses, right? Look at this. This is a classic parabola, but everyone recognizes it as a flower shape. Here's the stem. Here's the petal. But they grow in a parabola. That's an x squared equation because they are growing against gravity, which is, as you and I know, a squared equation. Yes, because it's an acceleration that pulls you back to the center of the mass that is Earth, that we call Earth. But I see it on my apple trees in particular. So branches, trees that grow new branches. Here's the stem, or here's the trunk.
Yep. Yeah.
Just like that.
And that's even good, as parents who have kids, maybe say, I'm not a math person, but they're an artist. They need to understand that, because to make something look like it's real, they have to understand that those things are affecting how things are formed and created, and that's why we see it as natural when they draw it that way. And they may even pick up on it, like you were talking about LeBron James and his shots. Artists tend to pick up those natural gravitational, physics, even animation. I had a conversation with an animator a while ago, and him talking about, just understanding how things fall. You have to know those things in order to make them look real.
You do. And we as humans will notice if things don't look real.
Oh, yeah.
We
absolutely.
have a very highly tuned sense for that. One thing, I hate to leave this topic because I love it, but another thing too, you could talk about like fishing, right? So why do fish move through the water so well? Or why do sharks have a different tail shape than whales, which go up and down, right? Like, is that a different thing? And why? And of course, music. I have my piano behind me, but so many Christian families, mine included, were musical, and I find that to be a natural. That I also teach piano, and I had this piano student ask me the other day, why does the A sound different, right? The 440A versus the 880A versus the 220A, the concert A versus all the others, and I said, because of frequency. And she was a little taken aback, I think, but
you were so excited.
What is frequency? And I said, well, frequency is about waves. Those are the sound waves that you hear, and how fast they are changes the pitch of the note itself. So if your child is musical or has taken any music theory, and some students really spark with music theory in a way that they might not spark with parabolas on a page.
Right. Yes, that is so true. So if parents are looking for your resource, your graph paper, where should they go?
I was accepted on Walmart.com, and I'm so thrilled because it makes the shopping experience so easy. You can just go to Walmart.com and type in color graph paper, and it'll pop right up.
Okay, and I will get that direct link from you and put that into the show notes too, so our users, our viewers can find that. Okay.
Sadly, I don't have enough of an audience to give you a commission yet, Peggy. That would be,
Oh
maybe
no, you're good. We're just happy to share, and happy that you have, spent this hour with us, just sparking an interest for God's world, math, and getting kids out of the box that they're not good at math, and that math is something that's not for them. It's for everybody in reality.
It's for everyone. God talked about it. The Israelites did it in the desert. If they can do it in the desert, right? Noah did it in seriously, but we can do it today. And it's okay. I don't mean to trivialize kids' fears about math, because we have put so much emphasis as a society, in particular, quite recently, on analytical thinking skills. And we value those, almost out of proportion to everything else in life, which wasn't always true, right? That's a very recent development. Previously, your ability to sketch and learn languages would have been a much higher value skill than your ability to make water wheels work slightly faster, right? So it's, I don't want to trivialize my kids' fears. Like, yes, you're living in a world in which the stock market and computer coding, has a huge weight. I get that. But learning about God's world through the lens of math, is never going to be A, a waste of your time, and B, it's never going to lead you astray.
No, absolutely. That's so true. Yeah. So good too. Yeah. In wrapping things up, what's one thing that you hope families will take away from our conversation today?
That Learning math is not a one and done situation.
Absolutely.
I have had students and friends who didn't love algebra, but then really thrilled to geometry, for example. And those are just 1 year apart, right? So if your student doesn't love math, your child doesn't love math at this time, that's okay. This is a journey. Don't write them off. Don't be like, oh, they don't like math. You know, another math teacher and I made this joke, like no one's ever stops reading emails or sending emails because an English teacher told them once that they couldn't construct a sentence. You know, like.
Or texting. Yeah.
No one stopped being online because they feel like they can't speak properly, obviously. So it's math is a journey. And I think that all sorts of cues, you know, like this and any other cues that you can come up with, generational context, are all steps on that journey.
Yeah, and that's a good way to see
and
that.
And if you too are going on a journey with your student, I think that you should be open about it. Say, you know, I did this in school, I graduated, it's behind me, but I've always wondered X, Y, Z. I've always wondered why some cars are front wheel drive and some cars are rear wheel drive, right? Like, does that make a difference? And we could go find out. Is our microwave actually properly calibrated? If we heat up 100 milliliters of water, is it going to heat up at the right power, right? Those are for more advanced students, right? For like basic electricity and magnetism. But there's all sorts of, why does salt water conduct electricity and not sugar water? Should we try that out? Carefully.
Right. But yeah, exactly. And I, you know, I've always seen everything in my life as an experiment, which I think has helped me to be able to embrace just the failure and the learning process. And the more that I think that, you know, that's really what that key that you really hit on just now was that we have to embrace that, and our children have to see it, because when they see us continuing that process of learning, they're going to embrace that and say, this is a lifelong process. This isn't something that I've arrived with and then I'm done. It's going to help them in their future to see that there's always something new to discover, and there's always something interesting to ask questions about, and to not stop. So love that.
That must be so great about homeschool, is that it's integrated. Learning is integrated into your life.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Margaret, for this time. I've appreciated it. It's gone so quickly. It's been such an enjoyable conversation for sure.
You physics women just hanging out. I love that.
Exactly. Yes,
I was worried that we would get a little too off track and start talking about physics, and we did a little bit, but
a little bit. Yes. I always have my notes to bring me back to reality.
The gravitational pull of notes.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I love your graph paper. We'll make sure to point our listeners to be able to find that so they can use that and really unlock some deeper understanding for their students. Like you said, I wish I would have had that for my middle child who really struggled in algebra. I think it would have made a big difference for him.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, for those of you watching and listening, I'll be linking the resources we mentioned in today's episode in the show notes, so be sure to check those out. And I'll also make sure to check out previous episodes of Empowering Homeschool Conversations to learn more unique and useful ways you can support your kids to learn at home, whether they're homeschooled or you're just supplementing school or just learning at home. Remember, every child learns differently because God designed them uniquely. And with a little creativity and faith, you can help your child discover that world, even math, that's filled with meaning and purpose. Thanks again, Margaret. And thank you all for joining us this week on Empowering Homeschool Conversations. I am sad to say that this is our very last episode of Empowering Homeschool Conversations. That doesn't mean I'm going anywhere. It just means I'm rebranding. As of next week, you will have a new podcast to listen to, but those details are still being worked out as we pre-recorded this episode. So stay tuned, and I will see you then. And God bless, and we'll see you on the other side. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
This has been Empowering Homeschool Conversations, provided by SPED Homeschool, a nonprofit that empowers families to home educate diverse learners. To learn more, visit spedhomeschool.com.